The vast majority of students who want to go to university this year can do so at the university their grades unlock.
Let's head to Virender Sharma in Ealing. Virender Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Universities need financial support to not only expand physical buildings and facilities, but also to fund an expansion of well-being and support services and other important areas of university life. Can the Secretary of State confirm this additional support will be granted to ensure his algorithm has not cost thousands of students their futures? And when will he do this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, in fact, we announced a £10 million capital fund to cover capital as well as equipment. This is on top of our announcement for additional funding to support high-cost subjects, and is all on top of the announcements that we made in both May for the sustainability of the sector and supported by the base package of £280 million.
Tamnanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In a recent National Union of Students survey, 55% of students report that the income of their parents or those who provide financial support to them has been negatively impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, and 80% are worried about how they will cope financially, not to mention that part-time jobs will be in short supply. So given that the university hardship funds were not designed for such demand, what extra provision will the government make to ensure that universities are able to properly support students facing hardship?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If a student is not already accessing the maximum loan and their parental or carer's income has changed, they should fill in a change of income form under the student loan company. And further to the honourable member's question, in regards to hardship funds, we have worked with the OFS so they can show more flexibility, and that will be £256 million for the coming academic year.
Holly Mumbycroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Hannah Moat is one of the top high jump athletes in the UK and was on track to study psychology and criminology at Loughborough University. Unfortunately, due to a clerical error inputting her centre assessed grade, she's so far been denied her place on that course. Will the Minister work with me to ensure that students like Hannah, who have been affected by administrative errors made by their schools, will not be denied their place at university?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really sorry about the problems that Hannah is experiencing. The DAMBORs have committed to turning around appeals quickly, and Hannah and her school should inform the university of the situation. I have agreed with all universities that all students, including those successful in appeal, with the required grades, will be offered a place at their first choice university, and deferred places will only be offered as a last resort. Specific admissions cases are the responsibility of individual institutions, but I will alert Loughborough to this case.
Shadow Minister Emma Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share SAGE's serious concerns that the annual mass migration of millions of students to any university means that, quote, significant outbreaks of COVID-19 are highly likely. Universities have worked hard to make campuses COVID secure, but the Department for Education must take responsibility and ownership of this crisis and recognise that most students live, work and socialise outside of the campuses. When will universities and communities receive the updated guidance on safe reopening promised in a DfE press release late on Friday night? What additional testing capacity is being deployed to keep staff, students and communities safe? And will the Minister make a statement this week on the safe reopening of universities?
Minister Donald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SAGE did indeed publish their updated guidance on Friday, and the government will issue updated guidance this week, which supplements our original guidance months ago. The safety and well-being of university staff and students is always our priority. And as SAGE pointed out, there is also evidence that physical and mental health will be impacted if universities do not open. Universities have worked hard to ensure that they're well prepared for COVID and have prioritised the safety and well-being, including introducing numerous social distancing and COVID secure measures.
Alison McGovern.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
The return to school is an important opportunity to support pupils to increase their physical activity. The department's guidance includes information on how schools can provide PE and opportunities for pupils to be active, including links to detailed advice from the subject organisations.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that's a disappointing answer because we know going into this crisis, councils were already having to deal with the fact that they'd had £42 million cut from their sports budget, which has a knock-on impact on schools. So will the Secretary of State take this opportunity to put on record what he personally is going to do to increase funding support to make sure our kids are physically active at school?
Well, it was a Conservative government that's introduced the sports premium. It was a Conservative government that's ensuring that £320 million is going out to schools so they can ensure that youngsters have the kind of activity that they want to see. Returning to school, yes, it's incredibly important in terms of the learning that all children benefit from, but it's also about the physical health that they'll get for being back at school, that we're backing with that money and ensuring there's great sports activities in all schools right across the country.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Gibb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exams will be available in all GCSE, AS and A-level subjects in the autumn. Schools and colleges that accepted entries from private candidates, including home-educated students in the summer, should enter those who wish to sit an exam, and there should be no financial barriers to doing so.
I thank the Minister for his reply, but I wanted to raise with him the issue of my constituent Ella Hampson, who's a Year 10 student, home educated, due to take several GCSEs a year early. The decision to withdraw private candidates meant that, unlike her friends and her peers, she wasn't given estimated grades on GCSE day. That caused a delay. She hasn't been able to move on to college in a way that she had hoped. And in any event, she's been told by her exam centre that she will need to be 16 on the 31st of August, and so she's not eligible for the autumn examination. She's only 15. I wonder what advice the Minister can give Ella for her to get the grades to recognise the work she's done this year.
Minister Gibb. Well, private candidates who were entered for the summer series, or where the school intended to enter them for summer, are eligible to enter the autumn series. The candidate's age is actually not relevant. We expect the school or college that enters students for the summer series to enter them for the autumn.
Chair of the Select Committee, Robert Holford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many thousands of private candidates, including mature students and those undertaking resets, have been left without a grade under this year's exams arrangements, unable to progress to the next stage of their educational employment. So will the Minister ensure that UCAS predicted grades are confirmed for all external candidates, provide them, just to confirm, the option to sit autumn exams free of charge, ensure the highest grade of the UCAS result and autumn resit be awarded, and urge universities to honour their offers for a September 2021 start date end, and for those external candidates who've received a centre assessed grade, allow them to appeal their results?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend raises some important points. Of course, as my honourable friend said earlier, universities are being flexible in terms of entry to universities this year. Schools, colleges and FE colleges are able to provide additional support to students sitting their exams in the autumn if they have the capacity to do so. And schools can also now use their pupil premium funding to support these pupils. The autumn exams, Mr. Speaker, are an important backstop to the summer grade process, and we are helping schools to offer them to students by assisting with additional space and invigilators where required.
Jill Furness.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Keegan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Colleges are facing financial uncertainty as a result of COVID-19, and many face reductions in commercial income and uncertainty with apprenticeship starts. We have a team, including skilled finance professionals, who are working very closely to support colleges, and we're also working with banks to ensure access to commercial lending where required. Since April, only 5 colleges have needed to access emergency funding.
Jill Furness.
Mr. Speaker, further education colleges provide lifelong learning, and they will be essential if we are to provide the levelling up agenda which the Prime Minister speaks so fondly of. However, coronavirus has left many with a black hole in their funding, And we understand it could be as much as £2 billion. And at the moment we are facing unprecedented demand. I just fear that this government does not understand the value of further education, or the value it is to the economy and to the new skills that we require in this country going forward. And also, FE colleges are flexible, they are adaptable, and they can help many young people who have been let down by this government during the fiasco of the education GCSE results and A-level results. Will the Minister confirm today that she will look into this and that she will actually provide the necessary funding, which according to the Sixth Form Colleges Association should be £4,760 per year for 16, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds? Thank you.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Let me assure her that we absolutely have FE colleges at the very heart and centre. We're planning a big reform of the sector, and as somebody who went to FE college myself from the age of 16, I'm absolutely passionate about this area. The colleges have done an amazing job responding to COVID-19 to support students throughout coronavirus. We continue to pay the grant funding and monthly payments for 2019 and 20, and will do so for 2020-21. We've also provided catch-up funding of 96 million for small group tutoring for those disadvantaged students that need them. On top of that, allocated of 200 million for FE colleges to be able to improve their buildings. We have a team of officials right now working with colleges, every college that needs that support. We are working with 40, but so far only 5 have needed financial assistance, but we will keep this under review.
Minister Toby Packins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government's own Commissioner for Further Education warned that as many as 40 colleges are currently at risk of running out of cash. Despite the measures that the Minister's just spoken of, the Association of Colleges are warning of a £2 billion cash shortfall, and we know from the Ney report that the government has got inadequate mechanisms for identifying colleges in crisis. So the truth is that all of those measures that the Minister speaks about simply aren't enough, and we need far greater action if we're going to see our colleges, their pupils and their staff not let down and left in financial crisis this autumn.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. Just so we're clear, we have actually provided grant funding to the FE sector worth over £3 billion for a full year, and they very gratefully received that. We've also increased and announced an increase of funding of 400 million for 2020-2021, an increase of 7% in overall funding. As you rightly said, and I said, I think, to the answer to the earlier question, we have 40 colleges which we're working with to structure their finances and help get them the advice and support they need. And if they need emergency funding, as has been available, then it will be available to those as well. We have a team of people working on this all the time, and the colleges accept that we are there with putting our arms around them to make sure that they get through this period.
Substantive question to Minister Gibb.
Oh, thought I was going to read it out. Exams are the best and fairest way of judging students' performance. Following the difficulties experienced with awarding grades this summer, we are determined that exams should go ahead next year. We are working with Ofqual, the exam boards and other stakeholders to consider our approach to ensure they are fair.
Heading to Bury Sherman. Bury Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister is the one permanent feature in the Department of Education. He's been there for 10 years. But surely he must admit that so many families and so many students were hurt by the chaos and the instability in his department. And it's no good trying to blame Ofqual or Ofsted. The responsibility lies in instability and lack of firm leadership in his department. And what is he going to do about it?
Well, when we were aware of the problems with the A-level results, we took swift action. The Ofqual decided to move to centre assessment grades, and within 48 hours of that decision being taken, the recalculated A-level grades were sent to all schools, and the GCSE results on the new basis were also given to schools to enable them to give to their students on the day scheduled, which was August the 20th. The model that was used to ensure that we were able to give students qualifications, notwithstanding the fact that we had to cancel exams because of the pandemic, was supported in a wide ranging consultation by the regulator. It was supported by 89% of respondents, and it was a similar model was used in all 4 nations of the United Kingdom.
Shadow Secretary of State Kate Green.
The fiasco surrounding last month's exam results caused huge distress to students, to their parents and teachers, and chaos for universities and colleges. And now it turns out that the Secretary of State was repeatedly warned of the dangers of the system of calculated grades and a flawed standardisation methodology that he adopted. He was warned by a former senior official of the department, he was warned by the regulator, and he was warned by what happened in Scotland. Why did he ignore those warnings?
Those warnings were not ignored. Every time we heard from people like Cambridge Assessment and John Coles and others, we raised these issues with Ofqual. And all those various challenges that were made by individuals were raised with Ofqual. We were assured by the regulator that overall the model was fair. We pressed Ofqual strongly on the appeals arrangements, which would address any issues for individual students which arose as a result of the operation of their model. No model is as accurate as young people taking the exams themselves. But when the A-level results were published on the 13th of August, it did become clear that there were anomalies and injustices in the results that went beyond the anomalies that we had been made aware of, for which we had put in place an enhanced appeal process. And as I said earlier, swift action was taken to ensure that all young people got the just and fair results they deserve.
Suman Bolthoff.
Mr. Speaker, the Centre for Ageing... Question 13 indeed, Mr. Speaker.
Here you go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand that ensuring adults can access the training they need is vitally important and is more important than ever. Latest figures show that between August 2019 and April 2020, over 195,000 learners, out of a total of 1,624,000 FE learners over 19, benefited from support for the unemployed. We are supporting people by investing £1.34 billion in 2020 and 21 in adult education, and we're investing £2.5 billion over the course of the Parliament in the National Skills Fund.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for her response. The Centre for Ageing Better have highlighted how the number of older workers on unemployment-related benefits more than doubled to over 600,000 in July. But she will also know the core adult education budget is still frozen in cash terms with last year's amount, and those who are recently unemployed or redundant who want to access training or retraining to upskill often cannot afford it or risk losing universal credit if they do so. The Minister, I am sure, will not want this to be summing up the government's approach to lifelong learning. So will she meet with me, Ruskin College and West Thames College to hear about the issues that we are facing in Hounslow, an aviation community, and to give people hope so that they too can have the opportunity to move forward ahead and get back into work?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady. Of course, we're absolutely committed to helping everybody who may find themselves looking for a job through this period, through no fault of their own, access to training of any age at any stage. That's why the Chancellor set out his plan for jobs to give businesses confidence to retain and hire and get careers back on track. And that includes £1.6 billion to scale up employment training, support and apprenticeships. We're investing in high-quality careers provision, incentivising employers to hire new apprentices, tripling the number of sector-based work academy placements and doubling the number of work coaches. This is on top of we're also investing £2.5 billion, which will be available in April 2021, and I'm sure that the colleges will be very much looking forward to that. And we're working to make sure that will make sure everyone has access to training. And of course, I'm very happy to meet colleges, and I'll be very happy to do so with the Honourable Lady.
Karen Buck.
14, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government will fund local authorities for our free childcare entitlements for the rest of this calendar year at the pre-COVID levels of attendance, even if fewer children are present. So early year providers will continue to benefit from the £3.6 billion investment in the provision this financial year. We've also announced supplementary funding of up to £23 million for maintained nursery schools, who often care for higher numbers of disadvantaged pupils, and will continue to work with the local authorities to monitor the sector.
thank the Minister for that answer, but last week research was published by the TUC showing that 4 out of 10 working mothers either did not have or could not rely upon childcare to enable them to return to work, and of those, a quarter could not rely upon having a nursery place. Now, given that there is already a £660 million gap in early years funding, what is the Minister doing to make sure that we do not see a further loss of early years providers in the coming months?
Mr. Ford.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Childcare is vital for working parents, which is why this government introduced the 30 hours entitlements and why we're investing £3.6 billion in early years this year. Breakfast and after-school clubs are also able to open, and schools should be working to resume this provision from the start of this term. And we've updated our guidance for providers.
Minister.
Well, I join the Honourable Lady in paying tribute to head teachers, other staff up and down the country who have worked tirelessly to get their schools ready for welcoming back students in a safe way from this September. Schools have been able to claim for unavoidable costs incurred between March and July due to the pandemic that can't be met from the school's existing resources, up to £75,000 depending on the size of the school. Core schools funding this year has risen by an additional £2.6 billion, and that's part of a 3-year settlement, which is the biggest funding boost in a decade. And although, of course, we keep these issues under review, our priority for additional funding has been to put the maximum possible into catch-up.
The joint letter by the Chief Medical Officers of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, what they were pointing out is that the children are best served by being in school. But the Honourable Gentleman is right to highlight the risks and sort of some of the challenges of children returning to school. And this is why at every stage, working right across the sector, we've put in place the strictest level of controls and system of controls in order to create that safe environment, not just for the children, not just for those who work in schools, but for the community as a whole.
Tammy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week marked the long-awaited return to schools for many students and young people across Coventry North West. However, this was a time marked with anxiety for parents, students and teachers about what would school look like during the pandemic. I've had a number of constituents contact me about being cramped into small spaces and a lack of support for students with pre-existing medical conditions, which put them at a greater risk of contracting and responding badly to the coronavirus. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Secretary of State is, what allowances or provisions has the government provided to schools to keep students with pre-existing medical conditions safe? And will the government stop passing the buck to schools and make face coverings compulsory in communal areas and secondary schools?
Secretary of State.
Well, as every stage, when we saw over 1.6 million children returning to school before the summer holidays, as we see the full return after the summer holidays, every precautionary measure that can be taken is taken in order to ensure that children of all ages and those who do suffer disabilities, their needs are properly catered for. And if there's specific issues that the Honourable Lady has, please do feel free to write to me and I'd be happy to look at those in detail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Getting our children back to school is critically important. It's vital that there's not just the safety at school, but also safety and capacity within school transport. I know from talking to local family coach operators like J&C Coaches based in Newton Aycliffe that the environment for coach operators is particularly challenging now. Whilst the postponement of the implementation of the PSVR regulations for school transport provides some relief, this is still a sword hanging over coach operators and their future viability. For longer time viability option cannot be signposted, this could result in them withdrawing from the market, reducing capacity when it's precisely what the opposite is needed. The current approach drives excessive costs to both coach operators and by extension local authorities. Whilst I absolutely endorse the need for accessible transport, can his department work to make these more fit for purpose for school transport?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue and highlighting the concerns of his constituents and coach operators in his constituency. Dealing with the issue of children getting to school as schools fully return has been an important one. That is why the Department for Transport made over £10 million available to build capacity in local authorities. That's why we made over £40 million available to local authorities to put on extra transport. But the issue that my honourable friend raises is one that has been concerned to many constituency MPs, and I know as a Member of Parliament in Staffordshire, one that we also highlighted with the Department for Transport. I think is a positive move that the DFT made in terms of delaying the implementation of these regulations, but I will ask a Minister within the Department for Transport to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this further.
Bill Lesterson.
Question 20.
Secretary of State.
In local areas where restrictions have been implemented, we anticipate that schools will usually remain fully open to all. There may be exceptional circumstances in which some level of restriction to education or childcare is required in a local area. In those situations, local and national partners will carefully consider the most appropriate actions with the aim of retaining as much face-to-face education as possible.
Bill Lesterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I presume when the Secretary of State says open to all, he doesn't mean people who've tested positive for COVID in his description there. There is a great deal of confusion amongst children, amongst parents and amongst our wonderful school staff about what the arrangements are in the event of a local lockdown or an isolated outbreak. The confusion, of course, extends to what the arrangements are for home learning. Yeah. So can the Secretary of State please tell us where is the guarantee that all children who have to study from home have access to broadband? Where is the guarantee that all staff will have the capacity to deliver home learning? And can you tell us what happened to the laptops that were promised months ago to enable this to happen?
State.
Well, the honourable gentleman was probably aware that we distributed over 200,000 laptops as well as over 40,000 internet router connections for children from the most
billion next year on top of this year's 780 billion, which is an increase of nearly a quarter over the 2 years and providing additional catch-up support on top of that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Special schools for physically disabled children, such as the superb PACE Centre in my constituency of Wales, we have faced special challenges over the past few months. How will my honourable friend ensure that as term gets underway, they receive advice and support that is tailored to the specific physical needs and circumstances of their pupils and the wider circumstances of their families, so that all children, whether they're disabled or non-disabled, can benefit from a full and varied education? Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for this question, and I'd like to thank all the staff at PACE and special schools across the country for all that they do. We've worked with the sector to provide detailed guidance, which we continually update as needed and will continue to do so going forward. Those who need tailored support will be glad to hear that specialists, therapists, clinicians and other support staff can attend school sites and provide those interventions as usual. And in terms of our £1 billion of catch-up funding, there will be 3 times more going into special schools than into mainstream schools.
Substantive question, Tulip Sadiq, Minister Ford.
Mr. Speaker, many children with special...
Sorry, the Minister should have answered. I've asked the question on behalf of the Minister, and then we'll come back to the question. You read out your answer.
Is this the same question, Mr. Speaker? It's a supplementary question. Thank you very much.
Yep. Sorry, Tulip Sadiq.
Mr. Speaker, many children with special educational needs and disabilities will find their return to school after a prolonged period of absence extremely challenging. The Children's Commissioner for England has warned that government guidance on school exclusions could encourage a zero-tolerance approach to challenging behaviour that may result in children with SEND who are struggling to readjust being excluded in large numbers. Can the Minister reassure me that she won't allow this to happen? And will she commit to reporting to the House the number of children with SEND who are being excluded from school as this term progresses?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, permanent exclusion should only ever be used as a last resort and must be lawful, reasonable and fair. And that is why we've already asked all schools to be understanding of all children and young people's needs, including those with special educational needs, especially when they return. And that this is exactly the point that I covered in my open letter to all children and their families was sent last week. Off-rolling is never acceptable, and this will be monitored by Ofsted.
I'm sorry about this, but we're having to go to topicals with Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 1, please.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since last week, schools across the country have begun welcoming children back into the classroom with a range of protective measures in place. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of those teachers, support staff and the whole school community in making sure that it has been such a positive and pleasurable experience for all children as they return.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend update the House as to what support his department is giving to universities and schools to help them recruit foreign students?
Secretary of State.
Well, a great important strength of our university sector.
House.
What more can be done to support in the future?
William Bragg. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay full tribute to all of the schools in my constituency who reopened on time and in full? And as the Secretary of State will be no doubt aware, this is against a background of record investment, which of course came into play in April. But he will also know, I'm quite sure, Mr. Speaker, that this was mooted as tranche 1 of a 2-tranche funding settlement. So can you give us the reassurance this afternoon that the further investment will be introduced on time in the next financial year?
Secretary of State.
Well, I know that my honourable friend was itching to get back into the classroom if there was a need for extra teaching support as a former teacher himself, and but he was ready, willing, and most certainly able to do so had the call come. My honourable friend will have probably seen that the schools in his constituency are seeing over a £47 million cash increase. This will be followed by the next financial year, which will see a substantial cash increase, and the third financial year where there'll be a substantial cash increase. Schools were one of the few, if only, areas that were able to get a 3-year deal, and I believe this will have a real impact in helping them plan for the future and deliver best education.
We're going to have speed up.
I'm also a former teacher, so if the Secretary of State, while he's raising those issues, but can I just ask him, has he heard any reports from schools about them making face masks part of school uniform, and there being school uniform requirements about the type of face mask that's worn? And whilst it's acceptable to, sorry, Mr. Speaker, whilst it's acceptable to have nothing inappropriate, surely it's unacceptable to require it to be part of uniform for a safety measure like this.
Well, I thank you, the honourable gentleman, for his offer to sort of step into any sort of supply needs that schools may have. But he raises a very important
of territories. By July, the Joint Biosecurity Centre's analysis helped to inform our decisions to establish travel corridors, meaning that people could return to the UK from low-risk countries without quarantine. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we all know that this dreadful disease takes instructions from no one. Even with our increased understanding about the way that COVID preys upon and capitalises on close human contact, we can still be taken aback by its speed of transmission. Whether at home through the imposition of local lockdowns, or abroad where a country suddenly sees infection rates take off. And I'm the first to admit that the unpredictable nature of the virus can take us all, holidaymakers included, by surprise. As I landed in Spain on my family holiday, I was immediately joining a ministerial call during which I helped to empower
more countries off the red list as and when it is safe to do so, in order for us to be able to welcome more overseas visitors back to our shores as soon as possible.
My honourable friend's absolutely right and very concerned about, of course, not just the city, but cities and towns across this country who should be enjoying a far greater number of tourists and visitors and business people than they are. And I will certainly do exactly what she asked. It is a fact that at the moment, numbers, particularly from European destinations, are, I'm afraid, on the rise, and that has led to countries coming off. But most weeks we do add a territory or two as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the scale of the challenges faced by the aviation sector and the scale of job losses, today's announcement does seem to fall woefully short of the integrated government leadership that we need to get planes flying and passengers having the confidence to travel safely. And indeed, many employers locally to Feltham and Heston have raised with me that they haven't felt the government is really listening to the challenges that they are facing. Airports have been working on testing and increased testing in pilots for months, and they don't feel the government has really listened to them either. So could he perhaps update the House as to when he plans to come back about on the issue of increased testing to be able to reduce quarantine times? And could he also say whether he will be coming back to the House to look at when he can increase the extent of the announcement he's made today, for example, to look at a pilot or trial to fly from Heathrow to JFK, with New York now having lower COVID rates than other parts of the US?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I speak very regularly, including, I think, at least twice over the weekend, to the boss of Heathrow Airport, John Holland Kay, and also businesses in her constituency and all honourable members' constituencies who are concerned about aviation and the issues that have been created. Of course, the simple fact of the matter is that, as I mentioned before, until we have tests which are reliable enough and signed off through the PHE and Port and Down process, it's not possible to simply jump the gun as far as those things are concerned.
To make sure that there's support, like furlough, in place for the airports and airlines and the aviation industry until those arrangements are put in place.
I can assure the honourable lady, I mean, we work very, very hard and have done with this package, which is nothing that this country has ever seen before in terms of size and scale and impact. It has saved literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs in this country. But as the Chancellor has said, we have to also balance that with making sure there are jobs to go back to. And I do respect what you said with airports like John Lennon and her constituency really struggling. I've spoken only earlier today to the boss of EasyJet, who's one of the main carriers there. They're desperate to get back in the air. We can't detach policy from the reality. And the reality that this virus is very real, and nobody has a simple solution to deal with it until we get a vaccine. But I can assure her I'll be working very hard with Liverpool Airport, with the carriers that come in and out of there.
West, we appreciate the value of the aviation industry at the moment. Edinburgh Airport's already had to confirm that around a third of its staff is to be made redundant. So can the Minister ensure us that the government will take every opportunity to balance the need to shorten quarantine to support the aviation industry with following the medical evidence about what is best?
I absolutely can. I've spoken to the boss of Edinburgh Airport during this crisis, and I know how difficult it is to run those businesses when you don't know what's going to happen next. Quarantine, of course, is a devolved matter for Scotland, so those decisions and discussions I know are ongoing between the Scottish Government and Edinburgh Airport, but she has my assurance that's certainly front of my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that 900 Harlow residents are employed at Stansted Airport, both directly and indirectly. However, already we've seen many job losses by ABM Blue Handling and EasyJet, who've also closed their Stansted Airport base. So will my right honourable friend ensure that the measures that your department is taking...
Benware, but in Batley we have enhanced restrictions. What is the Minister going to do to reassure constituents like mine?
Yes, I agree with the honourable lady. It's not only wrong and frustrating, it's also illegal for people to do that, come back and break the quarantine. So we absolutely will be stepping up measures, and I'm working with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and others to secure that. And I again will say more about it very soon. And in the meantime, I send the message out clearly from this dispatch box: when you break your quarantine, you're breaking the law and you're putting yourself in line for a criminal record. And it's not something that anyone should want to do.
Andrew Sullivan.
The travel corridor policy, whilst clearly very upsetting for those affected who've worked very hard for a holiday, is absolutely the right thing to do to keep us all safe. Could I ask the Secretary of State to consider one change, though, which would be to move the time, the weekly time for coming back, from 4 a.m. on a Saturday to midnight on a Sunday? Changeover for most people is on a Saturday or a Sunday, so most people could complete their week's holiday without having to buy expensive flights, which they don't have the money for, and ruin their holiday. Would he at least just consider that?
Yes, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. It's true that changeovers do indeed often take place on Saturday, and it might help if I just explain the sort of tensions that have to be measured off. The medical community would, of course, say don't leave any time at all, do it immediately. In fact, that's virtually what happened with Spain, the very first country to be removed from a corridor. Then, of course, the other view is allow it to continue, and it is a question of finding the best balance between the two that will satisfy both the Chief Medical Officer and his concerns, as well as try to get people home. So I can promise to undertake to continue to look at this, but I hope he understands and the House will appreciate the natural and proper tensions that are in place here.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents want to make informed decisions about their travel arrangements. So will the Minister consider publishing the evidence and criteria by which countries are deemed to be on or off the quarantine list?
Yes, and in fact I think I can help the Honourable Lady, because actually I've already several times published the basis for the decision-making process, and the easiest way to find it is actually on my Twitter feed at Grant Shapps, and it explains the measures that are put into place. All the data is then available. The data is then available for somebody to look at, but we have been quite clear about where you need to go to see exactly which measures are taken into account.
26 withdrawn. Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When is the government going to give the financial support package to the aviation sector, as the Chancellor promised in March, so that we can show the protection of worker rights, particularly those workers at BA and EasyJet?
As I mentioned in some previous answers, the billions of pounds have gone into support for the sector, and even once all of those schemes have been exhausted, there's also a programme that's run specifically by the Treasury, which enables bespoke support to the industry. And I can't go into details because those are confidential arrangements, but those do exist and is already in existence.
David Green.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend for a second to address international rail travel? He will know that Eurostar services from Ashford and Ebbsfleet have been suspended until 2022. Can he assure me that it remains the government's intention that those services should be resumed as soon as possible, and that the government recognises the importance of the Kent international rail services?
Absolutely, I can assure my right honourable friend we're very, concerned to see those stations closing and the lack of activity. And of course, as with our discussions about airlines, this is entirely driven by the progress, unfortunately, of the virus. So we will continue to take it keep it under review and work very closely with HS1 and that line to get them reopened as soon as possible.
Heading to Linlithgow with Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has ruled out testing at airports, claiming they give a false sense of security. Does the Minister agree with the Prime Minister about airport testing, or is this likely to be revisited when he updates the House on quarantine testing?
Well, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the example from an airport boss relayed to me this morning, where a day 0 test actually failed to pick somebody up, but a day 7 or 8 test was able to do that, I think shows why a single test on arrival is not the solution, much as it's not the solution to temperature test somebody on arrival to see if they've got coronavirus. So we need to be more sophisticated than that, and we absolutely will be, and I remind the honourable gentleman that different parts of the devolved administrations will need to come to their own decisions on it as well.
Heading up to Arrow with Bob Blackman to land this question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I agree completely with my right honourable friend on the need for testing to improve and to increase. And so, given that in most international travel, someone arrives at the airport sometimes many hours before travelling, will he give a consideration as the science moves forward to enabling testing to take place before people get on aircraft, so that if they are showing signs of symptoms or they actually have the virus, they're not allowed to travel at all and not allowed to infect people on the plane that they're travelling on?
A sort of pre-quarantine is something that other countries are using. My French counterpart is using a 72-hour test before people arrive in France, for example. Again, you need to be certain that somebody has quarantined during that period and be cognizant of the incubation period, which can be up to 14 days with coronavirus. So it's not an entirely straightforward solution, but I do think it is worth additional examination. And again, I look to the scientists to help advise on this, and they're being very forthcoming with that advice.
Heading to Brentford with Ruth Cadbury. Ruth Cadbury. Mute. Press the button. Sound.
Sorry, sometimes that's done automatically for us, so my apologies. So Heathrow Airport has a large testing facility that's sitting idle. The UK economy is losing an estimated £60 million a day in tourism revenue, and constituencies near airports like mine are in economic crisis due to COVID.
To David Jameson, who has been misrepresented here today, quite grossly, and to Dave Thompson from West Midlands Police Force, who worked tirelessly and will continue to work tirelessly, as they always do, to keep people in Birmingham and the wider West Midlands safe. The Minister said today that he would do anything, that Birmingham would have the resources that they needed to ensure that this crime can be detected, that victims will be looked after. And what I have to ask him is, will he guarantee that the uplift in police force numbers, which of course in the West Midlands, in Birmingham, we've had a loss of 2,000 officers since 2010 and only an uplift of 1,200. Will he guarantee that the uplift will be fully funded for the next 2 years? Those are the figures, absolutely. Will he guarantee that that will be funded for the next 2 years?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I obviously acknowledge the profound shock that this will have come to her community, and obviously recognise her remarks and join with her in expressing sympathy to all those who are affected and the wider shock within Birmingham. It's certainly the case that this year's uplift of police officers in West Midlands, which I think is 366, is fully funded. We have yet to decide the allocation of police officers across the country, but our commitment to 20,000 extra police officers over the next 3 years is unshakable.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Extinction Rebellion's attack on Friday night was indeed an attack on our society, our freedoms, our way of life, our fundamental freedoms. Does the Minister agree with me and my law-abiding constituents in Derbyshire Dales, who incidentally are emailing me in droves about law and order at the moment, that activists who pursue these illegal and guerrilla tactics should feel the full force of the law immediately?
Madam Speaker, I agree completely with the Honourable Lady, and she is right that all right-thinking people of this country have been outraged by tactics which are perceived as striking at one of the foundations of our freedoms. And
rebellion must mean that they face the full force of the law.
Sir.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady and her constituent. Where a crime is committed, it should be investigated, whether it's under the guise of protest or otherwise.
Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The appalling series of attacks that we saw unfold in my constituency, right in the heart of our great city of Birmingham, were truly shocking. My thoughts and deepest sympathies continue to be with the man who was tragically killed, those who were injured, and all of their loved ones. And Madam Deputy Speaker, given rising levels of knife crime in Birmingham, which now has the second highest numbers in the country behind London, what further urgent steps will the Minister take to get to grips with this epidemic and stop yet more people being killed and injured in our streets? And will he stop expecting urban police forces, such as West Midlands Police, to do more with less and commit to funding them in a way that is commensurate with the risks that areas like mine face?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I obviously do recognise the challenges in urban areas in particular in this country, and I know she will be pleased to hear that we've provided many millions of pounds of surge funding to West Midlands Police alongside money for the Violence Reduction Unit and, of course, the money to allow the uplift in the numbers of police officers. At some point this autumn, I will be visiting the force again to talk to them about their murder prevention strategy, and I will then be able to take a better view about how prepared they are to help us in the fight against this kind of crime.
26 withdrawn, so we go to Sir George Howarth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the people of Knowsley, can I express our solidarity with the people of Birmingham?
Have for peaceful protest, especially given that last year the Prime Minister's own father addressed an Extinction Rebellion rally and said, and I quote, he backed their methods.
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the classification or otherwise of any group in this country depends upon their conduct. Whether the Extinction Rebellion in its widest sense needs to think about perhaps that group within its number that is employing these extreme tactics, and whether it's appropriate for them to be members of the organisation is for them. But as I say, we keep all these things under review constantly, and it's all a reflection of the conduct of individuals in society as to how they're classified.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. West Midlands.
Well, they were only attacking 5 billionaire press barons is simply wrong. Small community shops have been at the heart of our communities during the COVID crisis, and they took a real hit this weekend. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the best way to engage in this subject is what those people who I'm honoured to call my constituents do, trying to tackle these climate issues, rather than putting hard-working business people out of work?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as usual, the honourable gentleman is exactly right. There is a way of engaging and influencing us as members of Parliament which works, and it is the one that he quite rightly points out. And like him, I've never refused to meet a Green group in my constituency. If anything, I meet them with pleasure, because we often coincide in our view. But fundamentally, as he knows, because he's been politically active for a long time, the way to effect change is hard work. It means leafleting, standing in election, fighting your corner, getting elected to this place, winning an election, and then putting your agenda in place. And that's what he and I have done for the last 2 or 3 decades, and that's the right and proper way in a democracy.
Thank you. Order. 3 minutes suspension.